So I'm going to start out with the discussion about the oxalate long game. All right. For those of you who like to understand a little bit of the research basis, there is very limited research on how rapidly you can move oxalate out of the body. So there's one study that Susan Owens, who is the founder of the Triangle Oxalates group, one study that she's referred to many times, which looks at oxalate being tracked as it leaves the body from someone who had organ transplants to reduce oxalate. So this is a primary hyperoxaluria person who is genetically making oxalate. So that person is going to be, I'm going to say, an extreme case, because people who have genetic hyperoxaluria, they start out right from the beginning building oxalate. So the whole body's built with oxalate, okay? It's everywhere. They know from the research that they will find it in every system in the body when somebody has primary hyperoxaluria. And by the time they get a liver transplant, they're usually in pretty bad shape. So the research looked at how oxalate was leaving the body after that transplant. And you see the very typical oxalate dumping pattern at the beginning. So that's this, what I've called the early game. I'm going to try and move us a little bit. There we go. And that's the first sort of 1 to 3 years where you see in these blood tests. So they were actually tracking blood with this particular person. And you see the oxalate going up and down in the bloodstream. Very typical kind of dumping pattern. But then what happened in the case of this person who had gone through the transplant was they got to like year 3 and oxalate came up and it stays up for a long time before it starts to drop. So that's of concern for a lot of people. Like, am I going to hit year 3, year 4, somewhere in there, and all of a sudden I'm outputting this huge amount of oxalate and I'm going to be constantly at sort of the worst level of symptom? I'm not sure that this is going to be how it is for everybody who reduces oxalate in their diet. But what I would say is that about the 3-year mark, I had a couple of really nasty dumping episodes that I wasn't really prepared for. I think I was a little earlier than that for me. It might have been closer to year 2, but I had also foolishly added some oxalate back to my diet. So I do not recommend that. Please don't. And I had added some high oxalate things back to my diet. So I think I put myself behind the 8 ball. But if we think of it as an early game, the first 1 to 3 years, mid game, sort of 3 to 5, end game, somewhere around 5. Early game is really dealing with this oxalate dumping pattern, the typical kind of wave pattern. And ideally at that point, we should be developing a kind of toolkit to deal with oxalate. So what supplements work for you to temper any of the symptoms that you get and any of the kinds of reactions that you get? And always in that first 3 years, I would recommend always treat any illness as dumping first, because you can't really go wrong with that approach. So when my kids were young, if they were not feeling well, one of the first things I do is give them an Epsom salts bath, because that really worked for them. And the advantage of treating like any virus or bug or sort of mild illness that you're getting as if it's oxalate dumping is that you get out in front of something which could be oxalate dumping and is not specific yet. And in those years, we relied a lot on minerals. We relied a lot on some of the lower dose B vitamins. I was not doing it as precisely as I do now. So I took a B complex, but a low dose B complex. That can work for some people, but for some of us, a B complex, we might have a reaction to it and not know what part of it is the problem. So really in the early game, it's better if you're trying things one at a time and rolling them out slowly. And we also figured out things like CoQ10 was really good if people were low in energy. Very good support to the mitochondria, because the mitochondria can be struggling with dumping. We relied fairly heavily on CoQ10 and vitamin E and some of these antioxidants that would support the body. So in those first 1 to 3 years, you're kind of figuring out, okay, what's my diet going to look like generally, and also the basic supplements. And please keep in mind that minerals are always job one. I'm sure I've got that somewhere in this presentation, because we are being depleted so much of our minerals by oxalate. And then on top of that, many of our foods are being grown in soils which are mineral depleted. We just have a lot of things going on, and those minerals are key cofactors to a lot lot of the vitamins and supplements that you want to take and have your body to use properly. So we really need to be on that mineral game. If over those first 1 to 3 years you have found out that certain supplements are helpful, for me, MSM, I've probably mentioned this before on Patreon Lives. MSM was like one of the best things that I could take when I was really struggling with oxalate dumping. So that's a sulfur supplement. Not everybody can go to that one right away. I didn't take it in the early game. I was closer to the 3-year mark before I stumbled into MSM. But if we're developing toolkit as you go along, hopefully we've got some things that we realize are helping when you have symptoms. Early game, B2. For a lot of us, histamine is going to be a problem. We do want to talk probably more about oxalate and histamine. But one of the things that's usually easy to implement, this is unfortunately true with all supplements, it's not one size fits all, but B2 is very helpful in terms of giving your body the resources to manage histamine. And because histamine can be downstream of oxalate, if you see histamine symptoms, I always treat those like oxalate too. So I kind of try to get at that linchpin issue, which for us really was oxalate. So if you've done some of that work in the early game, by the time you get to the mid game, if you see this beginning to have more intensity when you dump, beginning to have more symptoms when you dump, first thing I would do is go back and make sure my basics are covered really well. Lots of minerals. If you tolerate Epsom salts, you do Epsom salts. If you don't tolerate Epsom salts, but you do okay with magnesium flakes, use those. If you don't do well with those, but you do okay with Dead Sea salts, use those. Any of the things that are going to help with electrolytes and minerals in your body are going to be really important. And some people don't do well with salts of any kind, but do very well with bicarbonate. So oxalate really competes with 3 main, I'm going to call them substrates. I'm not sure if I'm using that terminology absolutely correctly, but oxalate competes for uptake with sulfate, it competes for uptake with chloride, and it competes for uptake with bicarbonate. And that's why these things are recommended as things that you can put into a foot soak, put into a bath, because topical use of that is going to give you some support. And I'm going to say from the outside in, as opposed to oral supplements where it's really from the inside out, where it's going into the gut and then the bloodstream is going to handle where it gets to. So I do like this, provides some support to tissues which might be last in line if the bloodstream's taking care of things. Not everyone will get like a bad swing of symptoms at this 3-year mark, but if you see it, then it's really important to make sure that if there are any supplements you know of that are really good basic support, that you get on them. I would automatically actually get on anything that helps you to moderate those symptoms and which is also going to, I'm going to say, support your system while it's dealing with this more intense oxalate movement. And I do think this mid game is, we've kind of dealt with the easy to get at oxalate, which is going to be easier to remodel tissues, as I'm going to say. So organs, your bloodstream is like the fastest thing to clear out and to deal with if there's oxalate there. But other tissues are going to take more time to repair or renew. And your slowest repair or renewal tissues are the bones. And I really think that this mid-game 3-year mark is when you're hitting the bones. And these can be a really big source of oxalate because bones are mineral dense. And if you've got an oxalate molecule, which is joined up with that mineral that's embedded in the bone, then you've got some work that your body has to do. Wherever you can give yourself some support outside in, especially if you are dealing with things like bones, I think that can be really helpful. So if you're not doing well with one kind of foot soak or bath, please try to rotate yourself through some other things and see if something else works. Anything that's going to give you chloride, sulfate, or bicarbonate, and then in different combinations. So I do use Dead Sea salts, for instance, because you get a lot more variety of other minerals in it as well. And for sure, if you can tolerate Epsom salts, it's an excellent support.
Baking soda would be good too.
Baking soda is sodium bicarbonate. Yep. And you can also get potassium bicarbonate. So potassium bicarbonate is often sold as a leavening agent for baking. So I usually recommend people take a look at nuts.com. Please don't buy nuts. Unless you're going to buy Baru nuts, those are fine. But they sell a food grade potassium bicarbonate, which you can use for baking or other purposes. And I just use it for the bath. And they're less expensive than if you go in and try to get a potassium bicarbonate from like a supplement store or whatever. They'll charge a lot for it. Essentially, once I was somewhere around year 4 or 5, I didn't really have to pay attention too much to oxalate, except as kind of a maintenance thing. So I would periodically take, like maybe once a week or so, take an Epsom salts bath to make sure that my body had that additional support. I made sure to stay on a B complex. I keep MSM on hand. I take CoQ10. I just don't take it every day. So I kind of worked my way down to a smaller set of supplements. So if you feel like you take handfuls of things, please know that that doesn't last forever. And I do find that I keep some things on hand for emergency, so to speak, like my MSM, but I'm not necessarily taking that every day. And not everybody goes a full 7 years, but the reason I think in terms of 7 years total is because it takes 7 years for bones to remodel. So once you've rebuilt any bone which had a fair amount of oxalate on board, then you should be clear. So I've now been doing this diet for, let me think, 17 years. And so I'm sure I'm clear of oxalate, other than whatever little bit our metabolisms make and whatever little bit I'm consuming, which is not much because I do feel much better if I stay very low. So that's not true for everybody, but certainly what I'm doing.